This clause freezes everything if they touch your assets.
Then let it freeze.
My name is Vivian Hale, and I am 62 years old. My hair, long and silver, I have always worn pinned back with precision, and I have never stepped outside without my pearls. Not once. Not even on that Tuesday night when everything I thought I knew about my life shattered. The hospital fluorescents hummed above me like a swarm of furious wasps, their light cold, unforgiving. I had been unconscious for 3 hours. My body collapsed after a 12-hour shift at the medical billing office, the concrete floor still echoing in my bones. When I opened my eyes, it was to the face of a young nurse, her eyes kind but laced with the professional sorrow of someone who has seen too much. "We called your son, Mrs. Hale," she said gently. "We left several messages." I closed my eyes, not because of pain, though every muscle in me screamed, but because of something heavier, an old, familiar disappointment that had grown like rust through the years. Brandon hadn't come. Of course he hadn't. Still, the words slipped from me, brittle and breaking. Did he call back?" "Not yet, ma'am," she replied softly, with the kind of pity that burns. "But I'm sure he will." That was Tuesday night. By Wednesday morning, my coworker Janet found me in the break room, her hands trembling as she held out her phone. Her face was pale, apologetic, but her eyes, those eyes told me she believed I had to see what she carried. "Vivian, I'm so sorry, but you should know." The screen glared at me. An Instagram post, time-stamped at 11:47 p.m. the night before, precisely when I had been lying unconscious on a hospital gurney. My daughter-in-law, Cara, smiled brilliantly at the camera, her manicured fingers wrapped around a glass of wine, the expensive condo glowing behind her. The caption cut sharper than any diagnosis. "Finally, a day without the dramatic old hack. Sometimes the universe gives you exactly what you need. Number blessed, number peaceful, evening number, no drama." I read it once, then again, and again. The comments scrolled endlessly, laughing emojis, friends chiming in about how exhausting older relatives could be. Someone writing, "You deserve this break, queen." 847 likes. 847 hands clapping for my humiliation. I handed the phone back to Janet. Then I sat in perfect silence for 3 long minutes. And in those 3 minutes, something inside me broke cleanly. The last fragile thread of maternal grace snapped, pearls scattering from a necklace that would never be whole again. "Janet," I said, my voice steady as a winter morning, "would you mind if I made a private call?" I stepped outside into the parking lot. My hand did not tremble as I dialed the number I had kept for years but never dared to use. Maris Duval, estate planning attorney. "How can I help you?" "Miss Duval," I said, "this is Vivian Hale. We met at the Riverside Foundation luncheon. I need to schedule an emergency consultation." A pause. Then her tone sharpened, curiosity igniting. "Of course, Mrs. Hale. When would be convenient?" "Today. This afternoon." "And Maris," I let the words land heavy. "I'm done gifting grace. I need you to draft me a plan that breaks greed." There was silence. Then the voice of a woman who understood. "I understand perfectly. Can you be here at 3? I'll be there by 3:15. I sat across from Maris that very afternoon, her corner office wrapped in glass and the muted skyline. My hands were folded in my lap, my pearls catching the thin slices of afternoon light like quiet armor. She had called in her associate, a forensic accountant named Jonah Rhee, a man with wire-rimmed glasses and the patient air of someone born to dissect other people's money. "Tell me what happened," Maris said, her voice low, inviting. So I told them. The collapse, the hospital, the post, the 847 strangers who applauded my erasure, my humiliation laid bare. Jonah leaned forward, his pen poised. "What assets are we protecting?" I listed them slowly, deliberately, as though each word was a stone in a wall I was finally building. 3 properties. The main house worth $1.2 million, a rental property $400,000, a cabin $180,000, an investment portfolio $23 million, 2 family LLCs established for tax purposes, approximately $200,000 spread across accounts. Maris's pen scratched the page. Jonah's eyes sharpened. "Any vulnerabilities, powers of attorney, joint accounts?" I hesitated. I made Brandon co-trustee on One Family LLC after his father died 5 years ago. I swallowed hard. I thought it showed trust. Jonah didn't flinch. His tone was surgical. That was your mistake, but mistakes can be fixed. For 2 hours, we sketched what Jonah called the architecture of consequences, irrevocable trusts with conduct clauses sharp as knives, springing liens designed to coil like snakes, cross-collateralization agreements that turned their greed into a noose of their own making. Finally, Maris leaned back, her eyes narrowing. "How far are you willing to go, Vivian?" I met her gaze without blinking. "To the bottom." That night, I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I had baked Brandon's birthday cakes for 34 years, where the smell of cinnamon rolls once lingered like a promise. I opened my phone and deleted every family photo, 20 years of Christmas mornings, graduations, wedding smiles. Gone, erased with a thumb swipe as precise as a scalpel. I learned mercy from my mother. I learned numbers from men who thought I couldn't count. Tonight, I preferred numbers. Tomorrow, I would begin building their coffin, and they unknowingly would help me nail it shut. If anyone has ever told you that you are too old to start over, let me tell you now, that is a lie. Your story is not finished, and mine was only beginning. Thursday morning arrived. I wore my navy suit with the pearl brooch, elegance forged into armor. Maris had called for an 8 a.m. meeting, and when I entered, Jonah already had papers spread across the table like war maps. "We've designed what I call a debt trap architecture," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Every piece looks separate, but they're all connected. When one falls, they all fall." Maris poured coffee from a silver service, her voice cool and steady. "The beauty, Vivian, is in the timing. They'll believe they're winning right until the moment they realize they're buried." The first document Jonah slid toward me was an irrevocable charitable trust. "Everything goes here," he explained. "The house, the investments, the rental properties. But the key is this, a conduct clause. If any beneficiary is investigated for elder abuse, identity theft, or fraud against you, all distributions freeze, permanently." I let the words settle like ice in my veins. They get nothing. Jonah's thin lips twitched. Worse, they get liability. The second set of documents spread across the oak table. "Springing liens," he said, almost with relish, "against both family LLCs, high-interest, short-term notes with balloon payments due in 6 months. The only way to satisfy them is with your cooperation, which I imagine they'll never get." Maris leaned forward, her pearl earrings glinting. "We're also filing sealed motions with probate court, a misconduct freeze. If there's evidence of abuse or fraud, no heir can claim inheritance rights. It's a legal landmine, waiting for them to step." The third piece was what Jonah named the fire sale protocol. We liquidate everything. Fast. Maybe 82 cents on the dollar, but speed is worth the discount. Cash goes into defensive accounts, into the trust. By the time they realize what's happening, there's nothing left to seize. I exhaled slowly. "How long?" 2 weeks. Maybe less if you're committed. I'm committed. Over the next hour, they detailed every step, every meeting recorded, every signature notarized with video evidence. I would speak 3 sentences on camera, affirming my mental capacity and freedom from duress, a shield against future challenges. "What about inheritance advances?" I asked quietly. "Brandon? He's always chasing easy money." Jonah smiled for the first time, a sharp, brittle smile. "That's the beautiful part. There are companies' predatory lenders that offer estate advances. Interest rates so brutal they crush the impatient. They require personal guarantees. Brandon would be personally liable for every penny, whether he inherits a dime or not." I could almost hear the chains snapping shut. Maris finished his thought with ice in her voice. "And based on what you've told us about his character, Vivian, he will walk straight into the trap. Greedy people make predictable choices." I signed document after document, trusts, lien, fire sale authorizations, bank notifications. With each signature, I felt lighter, as if I were shedding years of accumulated disappointment. "There's one more thing," I said as we finished. "They forged my signature last year to get a credit card. I never reported it because he's my son." Jonah and Maris exchanged glances. "Do you have proof?" she asked. I opened my purse and withdrew a credit card statement I'd hidden away. Brandon used my social security number and forged my signature on the application. He thought I'd never find out. This changes everything. Maris said, "This isn't just about cutting them off anymore. This is about justice." That afternoon, I walked through my house, the house where I'd raised Brandon, where I nursed his father. Through cancer, where I'd hosted 23 Thanksgivings, I started packing family photos into boxes. The wedding photos from Brandon and Cara's wedding went in first. I remember that day, how beautiful Cara had looked, how proud I'd been to welcome her to our family, the photos of family vacations I'd paid for, Christmas mornings where I'd watched them tear through expensive gifts I'd carefully chosen. Each photo went into the box with mathematical precision. No sentiment, no lingering, just sorting and packing. Kindness leaves doors ajar. Contracts lock them. That evening, I received my first text from Brandon in 3 weeks. "Mom, we need to talk about your retirement planning. Cara has some great ideas about maximizing your assets." I deleted it without responding. By Friday, the machinery was in motion. Jonah had identified the perfect buyer for my rental property, a cash investor who could close in 10 days. The main house would be trickier, but he'd found a buyer willing to pay asking price for a 30-day close. "They're going to panic when they realize what's happening," Maris warned. "Good," I said. "Panic makes people reckless, and reckless people make mistakes." I spent Friday evening at home sipping tea from my grandmother's china, watching the sunset paint my garden gold. Tomorrow I would begin dismantling everything I'd built, not to destroy it but to save it from people who thought love was weakness and generosity was stupidity. The last photo I packed was from Brandon's high school graduation. I was standing behind him, my hands on his shoulders, both of us, smiling at the camera. I looked at that younger version of myself, still believing that sacrifice was virtue, that giving more would somehow inspire him to become more. That woman had been wrong about many things, but she raised a son who would be predictable in his greed. And predictability, I was learning, was a weapon. If they tried an inheritance advance, they'd sign their own noose. I just had to make sure the rope held. Monday morning brought the movers. I'd scheduled them for 9 a.m., knowing that Brandon and Cara would be at their usual weekend brunch that stretched into Monday afternoon. Mimosas and avocado toast while discussing their next vacation. I stood in my driveway, pearl earrings catching the morning light, watching strangers carry away 34 years of memories. The dining room table where Brandon had done homework, the piano he'd quit after 6 lessons, the china cabinet filled with wedding gifts that had outlasted the marriage they celebrated. "Where do you want this, ma'am?" A mover held up a framed photo of Brandon's college graduation. "Donation box," I said without hesitation. The real estate agent, Patricia Wynn, pulled up just as the last furniture piece disappeared into the plastic truck. She was a sharp woman with intelligent eyes who specialized in high-value properties. "Vivian, darling, you sure about the timeline? 30 days is aggressive for a property this size. The buyer is paying cash at full asking price." "What's aggressive about that?" She smiled. "Nothing at all. I have the contracts ready." I signed a listing agreement in the same spot where I had once helped Brandon with his college applications. The irony wasn't lost on me. By noon, Jonah had liquidated my brokerage accounts. The capital gains tax would be substantial, but as he'd explained, freedom is expensive, but slavery costs more. The rental property closed the following Tuesday. Cash, transaction, no complications. The buyer was a young couple who planned to live there themselves, good people who would love the house the way I once had. Wednesday afternoon, my phone began buzzing. Brandon had driven by the rental property and seen the sold sign. "Mom, what's going on? Why didn't you tell me you were selling?" I let it ring. He called 6 more times. On the 7th call, I answered Vival. "Mom, it's Brandon. What the hell is going on? The rental house has a sold sign and Mrs. Patterson from across the day. Street says there were movers at your house yesterday. That's correct. Silence. Then what do you mean that's correct? Where are you moving? Why didn't you discuss this with us? Brandon, I'm sending you one letter. All. Future communications will go through my attorney. Your attorney? Mom? What? I hung up. The letter arrived at their condo via certified mail on Thursday. Brandon, do not contact me directly. All communications must go through my legal sane. Counsel, Maris Duval, a Duval and Associates. Vivian, that evening Cara, went live on Instagram from their condo balcony. I watched from my phone, sitting in my nearly empty living room. So, some family drama is happening, she said, her voice honey with practice. Concern. But don't worry, we're going to be moving into the main family house soon. Sometimes older family members get confused about finances, and that's when the younger generation has to step in and help. She winked at the camera. More. Space for content creation. The comments poured in. You're such a good daughter-in-law. Family first. Can't wait for house tours. I screenshotted every comment. 20 minutes later, I posted my own video. Not on social media. I never had accounts, but directly to my phone's camera. Insurance, Maris had called it. Evidence. My name is Vivian Hale. Today is Thursday, the 14th of September. I am 62 years old, of sound mind and body, acting of my own free will with no duress or coercion. I am making financial decisions to protect assets. I've earned through 40 years of work. No one is influencing these decisions. I am fully competent to manage my own affairs. Friday morning brought the sold sign on my main house, the one where Brandon had learned to walk, where I nursed him through chickenpox, where I'd waited up nights during his teenage years. I was having coffee at the Kit Daniel Island when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Estate. Advance up to $2.5 million available for qualified heirs. Pre-probate funding. Quick approval process. Click here to schedule consultation. I smiled. Jonah had been right. Predatory lenders had algorithms that scraped public records for estate sales and property transfers. They'd found Brandon automatically. I forwarded the text to Maris with a single word. Started. Her response came. Immediately. Beautiful. The trap is baited. That afternoon, I signed the final paperwork for my cottage, a small oceanfront property I'd purchased with cash from the fire sale, 2 bedrooms, a garden, and a view of endless water. No ungrateful children who thought my collapse was an inconvenience. Saturday evening, as I unpacked my pearls in my new bedroom, my phone chimed with a notification. Someone had tagged me in a social media post, though I had no accounts. Patricia Wynn had posted a celebration photo, sold in just 12 days. Another happy client at Wynn Real Estate. The background of her photo showed my former house with its bright red sold banner stretched across the front yard. I could only imagine Carrara's face when she saw it. They thought I was the field where they could plant their greed. They learned I was the fence that would keep them out forever. Sunday morning, I made myself breakfast in my new Kit Daniel Eggs Benedict with fresh herbs from my tiny garden and read the newspaper in peaceful silence. No interruptions, no demands, no performative family drama. Designed for social media consumption. My phone showed 17 missed calls from Brandon and 4 from Cara. I deleted all of them without listening. At 2:47 p.m., I received an email notification. Brandon had clicked schedule call with the Inheritance Advance Company. The hook was set. Dorian Pike's office occupied the top floor of a gleaming downtown tower, all glass and chrome, with a bowl of money green mints on his reception desk. I'd never met the man, but Jonah had done his research. Pike specialized in estate, advanced solutions for impatient heirs with interest rates that would make loan sharks blush. I sat in my cottage garden Tuesday morning, reading Jonah's intelligence report while drinking coffee from my grandmother's china. Pike's company Inheritance Bridge Capital had a 94% default rate. Their contracts were masterpieces of legal predation, packed with personal guarantees, cross-default clauses, and collection mechanisms that could strip assets faster than a pack of packs. Wolves. Perfect, I murmured to myself. According to the surveillance report Maris had commissioned, Brandon arrived at Pike's office Monday afternoon, wearing his most expensive suit, the one I'd bought him for job interviews 3 years ago. Cara waited in the lobby, live streaming her nails being done by a mobile manicurist. Pike, according to his secretary, whom Jonah had befriended at a coffee shop, greeted Brandon with practiced warmth. "We don't call it debt," he'd said, gesturing to the city's skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. "We call it a bridge to your future." The contracts were thick as dictionaries, filled with cross-sea collateralization clauses. First, position liens, and what Pike cheerfully called performance incentives, penalties that doubled monthly if payments were missed. Brandon, drunk on the promise of easy money, signed without reading. DocuWin, electronic signatures, all legally binding. The personal guarantees were ironclad. He was personally liable for every penny, regardless of whether any inheritance ever materialized. The first tranche was $350,000. After Pike's fees, they received $180,000. Within 12 days, according to credit monitoring reports Jonah had legally obtained, they'd burned through half of it. A BMW lease for Cara, designer furniture, back taxes they'd been dodging, a consultation with Beverly Hills' most expensive plastic surgeon for Carrera's brand enhancement. When the money ran low, Pike introduced them to his short-term liquidity partner, Mauro Novak. I'd researched Mauro myself, born in Montenegro. Educated in the School of Broken Kneecaps, he specialized in Montenegro, urgent collection services for high-risk loans. His Yelp reviews were fascinating, very motivated to collect, and helped us understand the importance of timely payment. The first text from Mauro to Brandon arrived on a Wednesday evening, a photo of Brandon's car in his office parking lot, time-stamped 6:47 p.m. The second photo, sent at 6:51 p.m., showed the same car from a different angle, proving Mauro had walked around it. No words, no's, just evidence of presence. Brandon called Cara panicked. She called him dramatic and said he was manifesting negativity. Then Mauro sent a photo of their condo, building. Same treatment, multiple angles, precise timestamps. Still no threats, just documentation. Thursday evening, Mauro appeared at their door. 6'4", knuckles scarred like tree bark, wearing an expensive suit that made his violence look professional. He brought flowers for the beautiful wife, he'd said to Cara, his accent thick as motor oil. "I am Mauro. We work together." And now, he sat in their living room for exactly 1 minute, admiring their new furniture, complimenting Carrera's Instagram aesthetic, asking polite questions about their lifestyle expenses. When he left, Heath somehow conveyed the entire scope of their vulnerability without making a single, explicit threat. The scuff marks from his shoes stayed on their white marble floor. Cara scrubbed them for an hour, but couldn't make them disappear completely. By Friday, their credit cards were maxed. The BMW payment bounced. Carrera's plastic surgery consultation was canceled when her deposit check was returned for insufficient funds. That evening, they received a formal notice from Pike's office. Payment number 1 due $47,500. Cure window 72 hours. They didn't have $47,500. They didn't have $4,750. Saturday morning, Cara went live on Instagram, her usual perfect makeup slightly smeared. "Sometimes the universe tests your resilience," she said, her voice shaking. "But we're stronger than our challenges." The background of her video showed moving boxes. They were being evicted from the main house they detain, never actually owned. Sunday night, Mose sent one final text, a photo of himself, standing outside their favorite restaurant, the one where they'd celebrated signing the inheritance. Advance papers. His massive frame filled the frame, and his smile looked like a crack in concrete. The message was clear. We know where you go, what you love, how you live. Monday morning brought a call from their bank. Mr. Hale, we're calling about irregular activity on your accounts. We've received fraud alerts from multiple sources and need to verify your identity before processing any further transactions. Their accounts were frozen. Their credit cards were declined. Their carefully constructed life of borrowed luxury crumbled in the space of a single weekend. That evening, desperate and cornered, they made the decision that would destroy them completely. They decided to unlock their inheritance themselves, using my social security number and a copy of my driver's license Brandon had photographed years earlier. They thought they were solving their problem. They were walking into a trap I'd built specifically for thieves. Tuesday morning, I received a call from Detective Riley Cortez of the Financial Crimes Unit. Mrs. Hale, we need to discuss some irregular activity involving your identity. Would you be available for a meeting? Of course, I said, adjusting my pearls. I've been expecting your call. The endgame was beginning. At this point in our story, I want to pause and address something directly. If you're watching this and thinking about your own family situation, whether you're dealing with financial abuse, emotional manipulation, or people who mistake your kindness for weakness, our book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, has an entire section on recognizing financial predators in your family. Too many of us make the mistake of thinking that blood relations excuse toxic behavior. They don't. Chapter 8, The Mathematics of Boundaries, breaks down exactly how to protect your assets without feeling guilty about it. The link is in the description. And right now, we're offering free shipping. Don't wait until you're in crisis to protect yourself. But let's get back to Vivian's story, because what happens next is absolutely explosive. Detective Riley Cortez was younger than I'd expected, with sharp eyes and the kind of quiet intelligence that comes from years of watching people lie. We met at a coffee shop near the courthouse. Neutral ground, she'd said, though I suspected she wanted to observe me in a casual setting. Mrs. Hale, we've received multiple fraud alerts involving your identity. Your son and daughter-in-law have been active. I sipped my tea and waited. Patience, I'd learned, was a weapon. They've made several attempts to access accounts, open credit lines, and claim inheritance. Payments using your personal information. Are you aware of this activity? I suspected, I said carefully. Brandon has used my information before. I chose not to prosecute at the time. Riley leaned forward. At the time, I'm older and wiser now, detective, and significantly less forgiving. She smiled. Would you be willing to cooperate in a controlled operation? We've been tracking inheritance advance fraud for months. Your case could help us catch bigger fish. What would that involve? We set up a sting, let them think they're about to receive a large payout, record everything, and arrest them in the act. Clean, simple, airtight. I nodded. I'm very interested in airtight. That same morning, while I was meeting with Detective Cortez, Brandon was having his own crisis. Dorian Pike's first payment was due in 36 hours, and they didn't have it. Morrow had started calling every 3 hours, his voice polite but increasingly pointed. Brandon, my friend, I drive by your beautiful building this morning. So many nice cars in the parking garage. Makes a man think about values, you know. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Their BMW, their neighbor's Mercedes, the building's entire parking structure, all potential collateral in Miro's fluid interpretation of debt collection. Cara tried to maintain appearances. Her Instagram stories that day showed her doing yoga on their balcony, promoting a mental wellness reset. But the comments had shifted. People were asking questions. Where's the house tour? Whatever happened to the family estate? You seem stressed lately, hun. Her follower count was dropping. Brand partnerships were being reassessed. The influencer economy, built on aspirational perfection, had no patience for visible struggle. Wednesday evening, Pike called personally. Brandon, buddy, we need to Discuss your payment schedule. I just need a little more time. The estate settlement is complicated. Time is expensive, friend. My associates are charging storage fees for patients. That night, unable to sleep, Brandon made the call that sealed his fate. Using a voice changer app on his phone, he called my old bank, pretending to be me. Yes, this is Vivian Hale. I need to access my account. I seem to have forgotten my password. The call was recorded. Every word, every lie, every desperate attempt to steal my identity was captured on the day-art trap line Detective Cortez and I had established. But the bank representative, who was actually an undercover detective, played her role perfectly. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Hale, but I need to verify some information first. Can you tell me your mother's maiden name? Brandon guessed. Wrong. And what was the name of your first pet? Another guess, also wrong. I'm having trouble verifying your identity. Mrs. Hale, perhaps you could come into the branch tomorrow with proper identification. Brandon's voice cracked with panic. I mean, I'm traveling out of the country. Can't we handle this over the Condry phone? I understand your frustration, but bank policy requires. He hung up. Thursday morning, Cara took a different approach. She drove to a different bank across Blaise town, armed with a fake ID she'd purchased online and a story about needing to access her confusion adult mother-in-law's accounts for medical expenses. This bank was also part of our sting operation. She lasted 6 minutes before the inconsistencies in her story unraveled. The fake ID was obviously doctored. She couldn't answer basic questions about my financial history. When pressed, she became aggressive, demanding to speak to someone who understands family emergencies. The teller, another undercover detective, remained polite and professional while cameras captured every moment. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to wait here while I speak with my supervisor. Cara waited 15 minutes before panic set in. She fled the bank, leaving behind the fake ID and a purse containing additional forged documents. By Thursday evening, their situation was desperate. Pike's payment was due at midnight. Morrow had begun driving past their building every few hours, each pass documented with time-stamped photos sent to Brandon's phone. That night, cornered and terrified, they made their final mistake. Using a check-kiting scheme between their last two functioning accounts, they tried to create artificial funds to pay Pike. Check-kiting is a federal crime. Banks have sophisticated systems to detect it within hours. Both institutions filed suspicious activity reports with the FBI. By Friday morning. Friday afternoon, Brandon received a text that looked like Salvation, Estate, Inheritance Release Meeting scheduled. $400,000 available. For immediate disbursement. Conference Room B. Metro Center Office Complex. Saturday, 3:00 p.m. The text came from a number with official-looking authentication codes. The meeting location was real, a legitimate business complex with security cameras and professional conference rooms. What Brandon didn't know was that the meeting was entirely fake, designed by Detective Cortez and her team. The room was wired with cameras. The money was marked bills from the police evidence locker. The estate attorney was an undercover FBI agent. Saturday morning, as Brandon prepared for his fake inheritance meeting, I sat in my garden deadheading roses and thinking about justice. The roses had been my mother's favorite, deep red, perfectly formed, beautiful, but sharp enough to draw blood if handled carelessly. Much like revenge, I thought. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Cortez. Everything's in place. Are you ready? I looked out at the ocean, its surface calm and endless. Yes, I texted back. I'm ready. Brandon arrived at the Metro Center building that afternoon wearing his most confident smile, carrying a briefcase filled with forged documents and believing he was about to steal $400,000 from his unconscious mother's estate. He had no idea that every door he'd walked through had been deliberately opened for him, and that they all led to the same destination, a federal prison cell. The trap was about to close. Saturday, 3:00 p.m., Metro Center Office Complex Conference Room B. It wasn't there, of course. I was home tending my garden and occasionally checking the live feed Detective Cortez had arranged on a secure tablet. The video quality was excellent, every detail crystal clear. Brandon entered the conference room exactly on time, his confidence restored by the prospect of easy money. He wore his navy pinstriped suit and his father's watch, the one I'd given him after the funeral, back when I still believed in the power of meaningful gestures. The fake estate attorney, Special Agent Lisa Chong, posing as Attorney Williams, greeted him with professional warmth. "Mr. Hale, thank you for coming. I understand there are some urgency issues with your mother's estate." "Yes, absolutely," Brandon said, settling into his chair. "She's been confused lately, making irrational financial decisions. The family is concerned about and her capacity. Everything was being recorded, every lie, every calculated manipulation, every attempt to paint me as incompetent." Agent Chong nodded, sympathetically. "That's unfortunately common with elderly clients. Now, I've prepared the inheritance release documentation. The amount available for immediate disbursement is $400,000. As discussed." She slid a stack of official-looking papers across the table. Brandon barely glanced at them before signing with flourishes. "I'll need you to verify your identity and your authority to act on behalf of Vivian Hale." Agent Chong continued. This was the crucial moment. Brandon could have admitted he had no legal authority to act on my behalf. He could have acknowledged that I was mentally competent and had explicitly forbidden contact. He could have walked away. Instead, he doubled down. "I have power of attorney," he lied, producing a forged document. "My mother granted me full financial authority after her episode at work." He signed his name as Vivian Hale by Brandon Hale, attorney in fact. Federal forgery, identity theft, white fro. Agent Chong handed him an envelope thick with cash. "Here's the disbursement. I'll need a receipt." Brandon's hands shook slightly as he signed the receipt, acknowledging possession of marked federal funds, obtained through fraudulent representation. "There's one more thing," he said, his confidence growing with the weight of money in his hands. "My mother might call asking about this transaction. She's been having memory issues. Sometimes she forgets conversations we've had. If she seems confused about the release, just you. I know, be gentle with her." "Of course," Agent Chong said smoothly. "We understand." Family dynamics can be complicated when cognitive decline is involved. Brandon smiled. "Exactly. Sometimes you have to protect people from themselves." Those words, "protecting me from myself," were recorded in high definition with timestamp and GPS coordinates. As Brandon left the building, counting money he'd stolen using forged documents and false representations, Detective Cortez watched from an unmarked car across the street. "Target has left the building with a marked funds," she radioed. "All units stand by." Brandon drove straight to their condo, where Cara was waiting with champagne and a live stream set up. She'd already posted a big announcement coming soon teaser that had generated hundreds of anticipatory comments. They never got to make their announcement. At 4:27 p.m., as Brandon proudly showed Cara the envelope of cash, federal agents and local police surrounded their building. The arrest was swift and professional. No drama, no resistance, just handcuffs and Miranda rights. But Cara, panicking, made their situation infinitely worse. When she saw the police cars, Cara grabbed my old purse, the one containing my backup driver's license and social security card that she'd stolen months earlier, and tried to flee through the parking garage. She made it exactly 2 blocks before patrol units stopped her. When officers searched the purse, they found not just my stolen identification, but also handwritten notes in her distinctive script, account numbers, passwords, and what appeared to be a practice sheet where she'd been forging my signature. The evidence was overwhelming and immediate. Back at the condo, agents discovered Brandon's computer still open to check hiding software and tutorials on emergency inheritance access. His browser history revealed weeks of research into identity, theft methods, inheritance law loopholes, and elder abuse statutes, specifically searches for how to prove elderly person incompetent. Detective Cortez called me that evening. "It's over, Mrs. Hale. We have them on multiple federal charges: wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, bank fraud, elder abuse, and conspiracy. The evidence is ironclad." I was arranging white roses in a crystal vase, a simple pleasure I hadn't enjoyed in years. What happens now? Arraignment tomorrow morning. Given the flight risk and the evidence of ongoing fraud, I expect bail will be denied for Mrs. Cara Halley. Your son might get bail, but with the amount of debt he's carrying and Mr. Novak interest in collection, he may be safer in custody. And Mr. Pike? Riley chuckled. Dorian Pike is cooperating fully with our investigation. Turns out he recorded every meeting with your son, including several where Brandon explicitly stated he planned to access your accounts without permission. Pike's handed over everything to save himself from RICO charges. After we hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine, the expensive bottle I'd been saving for a special occasion. This seemed special enough. Sunday morning, I watched the arraignment coverage on local news. Brandon and Cara in orange jumpsuits, standing before a federal judge who read charges in a voice as final as a closing door. The prosecutor outlined the case with mathematical precision. The defendants engaged in a systematic pattern of identity theft and fraud, targeting Mr. Brandon Hale's 62-year-old mother, including forgery, bank fraud, and elder abuse. The government has recordings marked currency, forged documents, and digital evidence spanning several months of criminal activity. Cara's attorney requested bail, emphasizing her community ties and lack of prior criminal history. The prosecutor responded by showing the court screenshots of her social media posts, including the dramatic old hag post that had started everything. Your Honor, Ms. Cara Hale publicly celebrated her victim's medical emergency and has demonstrated a pattern of exploitation and contempt. She is a substantial flight risk. Bail denied. Brandon's attorney made a more sophisticated argument about presumption of innocence and community ties, but when the prosecutor mentioned Marone Novak and the ongoing debt collection threats, the judge's expression hardened. Mr. Hale appears to be in danger from his own criminal associates, the judge observed. For his own safety, remand is appropriate. Bail denied. That evening, I received a collect call from the county jail. I didn't answer. I would never answer a call from either of them again. Tuesday brought news that made everything perfect. Dorian Pike's company had collapsed overnight. Federal regulators had frozen all assets, voided all contracts, and opened investigations into hundreds of predatory loans. The inheritance advance industry was facing congressional hearings and potential criminal liability. Marone Novak, suddenly exposed and facing RICO investigation, had disappeared entirely. His last known location was a flight to Montenegro with no return ticket. Brandon and Cara's debt, the crushing, unpayable obligation that had driven them to crime, had evaporated along with their creditors. But it didn't matter. They were looking at decades in federal prison regardless. Wednesday afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. Agent Chong, the woman who had posed as the estate attorney, stopped by my cottage. "Mrs. Hale, I wanted to thank you personally. Your cooperation helped us close a major case involving inheritance fraud. But I have to ask, did you know they would go this far?" I offered her tea, which she accepted. We sat in my garden surrounded by roses and the sound of waves. "Agent Chong," I said carefully, "I knew my son was predictably greedy, and my daughter-in-law was performatively cruel. I knew they had used my identity. Before, I knew they felt entitled to money they hadn't earned. Beyond that, I paused to sip my tea. I simply provided opportunities for them to reveal their character." She nodded slowly. "The beauty of this case is that we didn't entrap anyone. We just waited for them to commit crimes they were already planning to commit. Exactly. After she left, I walked to the edge of my property where my garden met the beach. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. In the distance, fishing boats returned to harbor, their day's work complete. Justice, I reflected, was remarkably similar to fishing: patience, proper bait, and the wisdom to let the fish hook themselves. Tomorrow would bring the formal indictment. Next month, the trial. In a year, the sentencing. But tonight, for the first time in decades, I felt completely at peace. The trap had closed perfectly. The debt had been collected in full. And I had finally learned the most important lesson of all. Some people will always mistake your kindness for weakness, right up until the moment they realize they were wrong. By then, of course, it's far too late. The trial began on a Tuesday morning in October, with golden leaves falling outside the courthouse windows like fragments of broken promises. I wore my charcoal gray suit with a pearl pendant, dignified but not celebratory. This wasn't a moment for triumph. It was simply the completion of a transaction. Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Brennan opened with devastating simplicity. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about a mother who collapsed at work and a son who saw opportunity in her unconsciousness. He played Cara's Instagram video first. The courtroom was silent as her voice filled the space. Finally, a day, without the dramatic old hack. The timestamp showed clearly posted while I lay unconscious in the ER. Several jurors visibly recoiled. Next came the recorded phone call where Brandon impersonated me. His voice artificially deepened, fumbling through security questions about my own life. The jurors listened to him guess at my mother's maiden name, my first pet's name, the street where I grew up, getting each answer wrong while trying to steal my identity. Then the parking lot footage from the fake ID incident. Cara, in designer sunglasses, confidently walking into the bank with forged documents, her Instagram perfect smile never wavering, as she attempted to commit federal fraud. The piece to resistance was the sting operation video. Brandon in conference room B signing my name with practiced ease, lying about my mental capacity, accepting marked federal funds, and then the moment that made one, juror audibly gasp, smiling as he said, "Sometimes you have to protect people from themselves." Defense attorney Patricia Walsh did her best with an impossible case. She painted Brandon as a concerned son, worried about his aging mother's erratic financial decisions. She suggested Cara was simply naive following her husband's lead. But then prosecutor Brennan called Maris Duval to the stand. "Miss Duval, you met with Vivian Hale on the day after her collapse. What was her mental state?" "Completely lucid, articulate. She understood complex financial concepts, made logical decisions, and demonstrated perfect recall of her assets and their values. In my professional opinion, Mrs. Hale was more mentally sharp than clients half her age. Did she express any confusion about family relationships or recent events?" Maris looked directly at the defense table. "None whatsoever. She was very clear about her son's history of financial exploitation and her daughter-in-law's public humiliation of her medical emergency. Her decisions were calculated, rational, and legally sound. The defense tried to argue that I was vindictive, that I had set up my own son out of spite, but prosecutor Brennan had anticipated this. Mrs. Hale didn't force Brandon to forge documents. She didn't make him impersonate her to banks. She didn't tell him to accept stolen federal funds or lie about her mental capacity. Every crime in this case was a choice made freely by the defendants. Detective Cortez testified about the check-hiding scheme, the fake ID purchases, and the systematic pattern of identity theft stretching back months. Jonah Reeves, my forensic accountant, walked the jury through the Dame money trail, how Brandon and Cara had spent stolen funds on luxury items while claiming concern for my confused financial state. But the moment that destroyed them came from an unexpected source, Brandon's own phone. The FBI's digital forensics expert, Agent Torres, had recovered deleted text messages between Brandon and Cara. Messages sent during the week of my collapse while I was still in the hospital. Brandon to Cara. Hospital called again. Not going. Let the old bat sweat. Cara to Brandon. Good. Maybe this will teach her who's really important. Brandon to Cara. When she kicks it, we get everything anyway. Why pretend to care now? The courtroom was utterly silent as Agent Torres read those messages aloud. Even the defense attorneys looked stunned. Carrera started crying. Not the pretty, Instagram-worthy tears she'd perfected for her videos, but ugly, desperate sobs that shook her entire body. Brandon sat motionless, his face gray as ash. The jury was out for exactly 2 hours and 43 minutes. Guilty on all counts. Judge Harrison scheduled sentencing for 3 weeks later, as the defendants were led away in shackles. Cara turned to look at me for the first time since the trial began. Her eyes were wild with desperation and rage. "I hope you're happy," she screamed across the courtroom. "I hope destroying your own family was worth it." I met her gaze calmly and said nothing because happiness wasn't the point. Justice was the point, and justice doesn't require an in-now audience's approval. That evening I cooked dinner for myself, salmon with herbs from my garden, a glass of crisp white wine, fresh bread from the bakery in town, simple pleasures that tasted like freedom. The next morning brought an unexpected call from Brandon's defense attorney. "Mrs. Hale, my client. He would like to write you a letter. He's hoping for a reconciliation before sentencing. Perhaps you could write a letter to the judge requesting mercy." "No," I said simply. "I understand you're hurt, but he's your son." "Number," I repeated and hung up. 2 weeks later, Carrera's attorney tried the same approach. This time she suggested that family forgiveness might reduce the sentences for both defendants. "Miss Walsh," I said, "your clients celebrated my medical emergency, stole my identity, forged my signature, committed federal fraud, and then tried to claim I was mentally incompetent. The time for mercy was before they committed those crimes, not after they got caught." Sentencing day arrived with the first snow of winter, soft flakes that covered the courthouse steps in pristine white. I wore my navy coat with a fur collar, my grandmother's pearls, and my mother's wedding ring. 3 generations of women who had learned to be strong in a world that preferred them weak. Judge Harrison was thorough and methodical. The defendants engaged in a sophisticated scheme targeting a vulnerable elderly victim, the defendant Brandon Hale's own mother. The psychological cruelty displayed in their communications, combined with the systematic nature of their financial crimes, demands substantial punishment. He looked at Brandon first. "Mr. Hale, you have shown no remorse for exploiting your mother's medical emergency or for the years of financial abuse preceding these charges. Your actions demonstrate a pattern of predatory behavior towards someone who loved and trusted you. The court sentences you to 18 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You are permanently prohibited from serving as an officer or director of any corporation, and you are ordered to pay full restitution of $847,000. Brandon's face crumpled. 18 years. He would be 52 when he was released if he served his full term. Judge Harrison turned to Carrera. "Miss Hale, your public mockery of your victim's medical emergency demonstrates a level of callousness that shocks the conscience of this court. Your social media posts reveal someone who views other people's suffering as entertainment. The court sentences you to 22 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. The additional time reflects the aggravated nature of your identity theft charges and your role in publicly humiliating the victim. 22 years. Cara would be 50 when she was released, assuming she served her full sentence. The restitution orders were largely symbolic. They had no assets left to seize, no income to garnish, no future earning potential to claim. But the numbers would follow them forever, growing with interest, ensuring they could never truly start over. As they were led away for the final time, neither of them looked back at me. Perhaps they finally understood that some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. That evening, I received a small, neat envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a car title, Brandon's BMW, signed over to me by the U.S. Marshal. Service as partial restitution. I donated the car to a local domestic violence shelter the next day. They could sell it and use the money to help women escape dangerous situations. Women who, like me, had learned that sometimes the only way to protect yourself is to stop protecting people who see your kindness as weakness. The legal proceedings were over. The debt had been collected in full. Now, finally, I could begin the rest of my life. I want to. Pause here to talk about something important. Many of you watching this might think Vivian went too far, that family should forgive family no matter what. But here's what our book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, teaches. Forgiveness is not the same as enabling. Brandon and Cara had years to change their behavior. They chose not to. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face the natural consequences of their choices. The link to our book is in the description. And remember, we offer a 30-day money-back guarantee because we believe this message can change lives. But Vivian's story isn't over yet. What happens next will show you exactly why some bridges should stay burned. 3 months after the sentencing, I received a letter from the federal prison where Brandon was serving his time. Not from him. I had explicitly instructed the facility that I would accept no communications from either inmate, but from the prison chaplain. Mrs. Hale, it read, your son has expressed deep remorse for his actions and is seeking spiritual counseling. He would very much like to write to you about his journey toward redemption. Perhaps you would consider. I stopped reading and fed the letter to my fireplace. Redemption is a choice made before the crime, not after the consequences. The same week, I received a more interesting piece of mail, a check for $47,000 from the Federal Asset Forfeit Program. Apparently, the government had seized luxury items Brandon and Cara had purchased with stolen funds, designer handbags, jewelry, electronics, and sold them at auction. I deposited the check and donated an equivalent amount to the local financial literacy program for seniors. If my suffering could prevent other elderly people from being victimized by their own families, then perhaps there was purpose in it. Spring brought an unexpected visitor to my cottage. Patricia Walsh, Cara's former defense attorney, appeared at my door on a Thursday morning, looking haggarded and older than her years. Mrs. Hale, May I speak with you? I invited her in for tea, curious about her purpose. Cara has. I've been trying to contact you through multiple channels. She began letters, phone calls, other inmates' families. She's not adjusting well to incarceration. I poured tea for my grandmother's service. The china delicate as butterfly wings? I'm not surprised. Prison lacks the proper lighting for influencer content. Patricia Walsh winced. She's facing the reality of 22 years. She's had time to think about what she did, what she lost. She's genuinely sorry. I'm sure she's sorry she got caught. Mrs. Tail, I understand your anger. Do you? I set down my teacup with precise control. Miss Walsh, your client celebrated my medical emergency on social media. She stole my identity, forged my documents, and spent months planning to exploit what she hoped would be my death or incapacitation. Now she's sorry because she's facing consequences. She was young. She made mistakes. She was 34 years old enough to vote, old enough to marry, old enough to know that fraud is illegal. Don't infantilize her choices. Patricia Walsh left without accomplishing her mission. As she walked down my garden path, I heard her mutter, God, you really are. Cold, perhaps, but coldness, I'd learned, was just another word for clarity. That summer, I received news through Maris Duval. Brandon had been transferred to a different facility after an incident involving another inmate who had recognized him from the crime news coverage. Apparently, even federal prisoners drew moral lines about people who abused their own mothers. Cara, meanwhile, had been placed in protective custody after receiving threats from other inmates who had seen her viral old hag post. The hierarchy of prison. Justice, it seemed, had its own sense of poetic balance. I felt nothing about either development, not satisfaction, not sympathy, just the quiet recognition that actions have consequences, and consequences don't care about your feelings. In October, exactly 1 year after their sentencing, I received a call from a documentary filmmaker interested in telling my story. Mrs. Hale, your case has become a landmark in elder abuse prosecution. We'd like to interview you about the experience. No, thank you. We could protect your anonymity, change identifying details. My story is not entertainment, I said, firmly. Good day. I hung up and went to tend my roses. They were blooming, magnificently, red as garnets, perfect as justice, sharp enough to draw blood from the careless. Some stories don't need to be told, they just need to be lived. The following spring brought my 70th birthday, a milestone I celebrated, quietly with champagne and homemade cake in my garden. 8 years had passed since that night in the hospital when I realized my son wouldn't come. 7 years since I'd made the call that changed everything. I was printing my roses when the mail carrier arrived with a certified letter, legal notice from the federal prison system. Brandon Hale, inmate number 47839, had died of a heart attack at age 46. No family had claimed the body. I read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in my desk drawer. That evening, I cooked myself a beautiful dinner and watched the sunset paint my ocean view in shades of gold and crimson. I felt exactly what I expected to feel. Nothing. Grief, I had learned, is reserved for people we've lost. I had lost my son years before he died. Lost in him to entitlement, to cruelty, to the belief that love was something to be exploited rather than treasured. The person who died in prison was a stranger who happened to share DNA with the child I had once loved. 6 months later, I received word that Cara had petitioned for compassionate release, citing the death of her husband and her own deteriorating mental health. The petition was denied. Federal sentences for aggravated identity theft have mandatory minimums that don't bend for inconvenient emotions. She still had 16 years left to serve. On quiet evenings, I sometimes wondered if she still thought about that Instagram post. Finally, a day without the dramatic old hack. Did she remember the 847 likes? Did she regret the cruelty or just the consequences? It didn't matter. Regret is a luxury reserved for people who still have futures. Cara had chosen her path with perfect clarity, and now she would walk it to its end. I, meanwhile, had chosen a different path entirely. My cottage garden was featured in the local magazine that spring, a study in seaside serenity. The photographer captured my roses in perfect bloom, their beauty sharp-edged and enduring, like justice itself, like memory, like the peace that comes from knowing you survived people who mistook your kindness for weakness, right up until the moment they learned the difference. 5 years after Brandon's death, I received an unexpected letter from the State Attorney General's office. They were launching a new initiative to combat elder financial abuse, using my case as the foundation for stronger legislation. The Vivian Hale Protection Act would create harsher penalties for family members who exploit elderly relatives, streamline the prosecution process, and provide better resources for victims. They wanted my permission to use my name. I gave it gladly. If my suffering could protect other grandmothers from their own ungrateful children, then perhaps there was redemption in it. After all, the law passed unanimously 6 months later. I was invited to the signing ceremony, but declined to attend. I'd never wanted to be a public figure, a symbol, or a cautionary tale. I just wanted to be left alone to tend my garden and live my life. That same year, Maris Duval retired, and her firm handled the final details of my legal affairs. The irrevocable trust I'd established was performing beautifully. The investments had grown substantially, and the charitable distributions were helping. dozens of organizations that supported elderly victims of abuse. You know, Mara said during our final meeting, in 30 years of estate law, I've never seen anyone execute a more perfect defensive strategy. You didn't just protect your assets. You created a legacy that will help others for decades. Justice, I replied, should be sustainable. My cottage had become exactly what I'd hoped, a sanctuary where every morning brought the sound of waves and every evening painted the sky in masterpiece colors. I developed a routine: coffee on the terrace at sunrise, tending my garden, reading in the afternoon, simple dinners prepared with ingredients from my own herbs and vegetables. The local librarian, a woman named Grace, had become something like a friend. We shared recommendations for mystery novels and occasionally had lunch at the small cafe overlooking the harbor. "Don't you get lonely?" she asked one afternoon as we watched fishing boats return with their daily catch. "No," I said, and meant it completely. Loneliness requires missing people who were worth having around. I don't miss people who saw my kindness as permission to hurt me. Grace nodded, thoughtfully. You know, there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. Exactly. That evening, I received a call from the federal prison where Cara was serving her sentence. She had 10 years remaining and was requesting permission to write to me. Inmate Hale states that she has important information about additional crimes committed by her late husband, the warden explained. She claims she can provide evidence that might help other victims if you're willing to hear her testimony. It was clever, I admitted, using the promise of helping others to try to reestablish contact with me, but I'd learned to recognize manipulation in all its forms. The inmate can provide any information she has to the appropriate law enforcement agencies. I said she doesn't need my permission for that, and she certainly doesn't need contact with me. She specifically requested. My answer is no. Please make a note in her file that I will never accept communication from her under any circumstances, and that any attempts to contact me through third parties should be treated as harassment. I hung up and poured myself a glass of wine, a crisp Sauvignon Blanc that paired perfectly with the salmon I'd grilled with herbs from my garden. Some bridges once burned should stay ash. 3 years later, I learned through a news article that Cara had died in prison, suicide, according to the brief report. She was 49 years old and had been serving the 13th year of her sentence. I read the article once, filed it away, and went about my day as usual. I felt no satisfaction in her death, but no sorrow either. She had made choices, and choices have consequences. The final choice had been hers alone. That autumn brought my 75th birthday, which I celebrated with champagne and a small cake decorated with roses from my garden, the same roses I'd been tending for 15 years. Their beauty sustained by careful attention, and the understanding that some things require both patience and sharp edges to flourish. My phone rang that evening, a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Hale. "This is Jonathan Pike, Dorian Pike's son. I hope you don't mind me calling." I remember Dorian Pike, the predatory lender who had trapped Brandon and Cara in debt before cooperating with federal investigators to save himself from RICO charges. "What can I do for you, Mr. Pike?" "My father passed away last month. Cancer. Before he died, he asked me to contact you. He said he had something that belonged to you." I was intrigued, despite myself. What kind of something? Documents, recordings. He kept copies of everything from his business dealings with your son and daughter-in-law. He said you were the smartest person he'd ever met, and he wanted you to have the files in case you ever needed them. 2 days later, Jonathan Pike arrived at my cottage with a manila envelope thick as a dictionary. Inside were audio recordings of every meeting Brandon and Cara had with his father, copies of all signed documents, and detailed notes about their behavior and statements. "Why did your father keep all this?" I asked. Jonathan smiled, raw-fuely. He said that people who lie to banks will eventually lie to him, and he wanted insurance. But after the federal investigation, he realized he'd been dealing with someone who was 3 moves ahead of everyone else. What do you mean? He figured out that you'd orchestrated the whole thing. Let them believe they were clever. Let them think they were outsmarting an old woman. In truth, every step they took was into the jaws of an airtight trap. Jonah called it the most elegant revenge he had ever seen. That evening, I sat in my garden as the sun melted into the ocean, listening to their voices echo from the recordings. Brandon so certain, so cruel, boasting to Pike how his confused old mother would never notice what was happening to her money. Cara laughing without mercy, mocking my collapse, joking about my funeral as though it were a punchline, their words captured forever, proof carved into sound of who they had chosen to become. One recording I kept, the one where Brandon sneered, "The old bat trusts me completely. She'll sign anything I put in front of her." That was all the evidence I would ever need, a reminder of how deeply they had misjudged both my character and my capabilities. The rest, I consigned to the fire. Papers curling, blackening, disintegrating into ash. Some truths are not worth keeping, they are better left to burn. As the flames rose, I thought of the younger woman I had once been, the woman who believed love should be unconditional, that family loyalty was sacred, that kindness would one day be returned in kind. That woman was wrong about many things, but she had been right about one. Some lessons can only be learned in pain, and some people only reveal their true nature when they believe they are safe. The fire devoured the last traces of betrayal, sparks leaping like judgment against the night. By morning, there would be nothing left but ash, and the wisdom that comes from surviving those who mistake love for weakness. I poured myself a final glass of wine and stepped onto the terrace. Before me stretched the ocean, dark, infinite, serene. Tomorrow would bring another sunrise, another day in the garden, another page in the life I had rebuilt from the wreckage of theirs. For me, that was victory enough. Now I am 82 years old. 20 years have passed since that night in the hospital, when I first learned the true depth of my son's indifference and my daughter-in-law's cruelty. I sit again in my garden, roses blooming fiercely after decades of tending, their thorns as sharp as the day I planted them. My cottage, weathered but steadfast, looks out to the eternal sea-shifting colors, never still, yet always vast. Yesterday, a journalist reached out, asking for an interview about the Hale case, now a landmark in the prosecution of elder abuse. As always, I declined. My story was never meant as inspiration, never as entertainment. It was simply what happens when a woman finally learns the difference between being kind and being a fool. This morning's mail brought two things. The first, a letter from the charitable trust I built from the ashes of my former life. It has grown strong over the decades, now giving $200,000 a year to protect elderly victims of family fraud. More than 3,000 people saved, grandparents betrayed by grandchildren, widows preyed upon by stepchildren, parents treated as obstacles by their own children. Each one, a small victory against the lie that blood excuses cruelty. The second envelope made me smile. A royalty check for $847 from a law textbook that uses my case as a study in defensive estate planning. $847, the exact number of likes on Cara's cruel post mocking me all those years ago. The universe, it seems, balances its own ledgers. I walked into town, as I do when the weather is kind, past the school where children's laughter rings like wind chimes, past the bakery where Grace, well into her 80s, still bakes the best sourdough on the coast, past the harbor where boats sleep between their battles with the sea. At the bank, the young teller recognized me. "Good morning, Mrs. Hale. Another royalty?" "Another royalty," I replied, steady hand signing as firmly as the day I declared war on my own blood. On the way home, I stopped at the cemetery. Thomas lies there, the only family who ever loved me without conditions. The stone bears his name, Thomas Hale, beloved husband. And below, the words I chose, he loved without conditions and expected nothing in return. A perfect mirror to the son who bore his name, yet never his heart. That evening, I dined alone, as I often do, salmon from the local fisher, vegetables from my garden, bread from Grace's oven. I lit a candle on the terrace, watching the ocean flare in gold and crimson, the same colors it wore 20 years ago when I began again. My phone rang a number I did not know. Likely another filmmaker, another journalist chasing a story they could never truly understand. I let it ring. My scars are not their spectacle. Before bed, I check the locks. Security is as much ritual as it is protection. In my room, I removed my pearls, the same strand I wore to my first meeting with Maris Duval. They gleamed in the lamplight, unbroken, perfect, like justice, like revenge, measured and precise, like the peace I earned by burning the bridge they thought would hold me. They called me old. They called me dramatic. They called me a hag. I called my lawyer, and that made all the difference. As we close Vivian's story, I want to leave you with this thought. Age is not a weakness. Experience is not something to be dismissed. And kindness is not the same as being a doormat. If you found yourself in a similar situation, whether with family, friends, or anyone who mistakes your generosity, for gullibility, our book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, can help. The workbook section includes templates for difficult conversations, legal checklists for asset protection, and most importantly, permission to put yourself first. Vivian's story is extreme, but her principle is universal. You teach people how to treat you. If you don't set boundaries, other people will set them for you, and they won't be boundaries that serve your best interests. The link to Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain is in the description box below. Don't wait until you're in crisis to protect yourself. Start today. Remember, your story isn't over just because someone tried to write the ending for you. You still have chapters left to write.